Hi, this is Luke Bonner, former pro basketball player, current CEO of Power Forward, and I am on the game plan.
Luke Bonner, thank you so much for joining me on the game plan today.
Thanks so much for reaching out. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm glad that we got connected through our mutual friend Jordan Flegel. We'll chat about Jordan's game in a little bit, but before we do that, I want to chat about your professional playing career, because I think for a lot of folks, we've had guests on the show that have played basketball. We've had folks that have played overseas, like Matthew Dellavedova, but to have the kind of extensive career that you did overseas, that's not an experience that our listeners are probably familiar with. So talk me through that. What's that road less understood, going and playing basketball overseas?
Yeah, I had a prolific career, right? World-renowned Luke Bonner, super famous in Lithuania for the most part. It was an incredible experience for me. I was out of high school, went to West Virginia on a full scholarship, ended up transferring to UMass and finished out my career there. I was very much a run-of-the-mill role-playing ogre in the Atlantic 10. Apparently there is a market for those still in certain countries after you leave school. I journeyed over to Hungary at first, played there, played in the D League, now the G League, obviously, and then played in Lithuania. And I'd say the experience is it's really hard, honestly, and it's challenging mentally. A lot of the Americans, you never really feel settled because it's not like there's any sort of union or anything. There's a lot of stuff that can happen behind the scenes where you abruptly no longer have a job. So there's just kind of, it's really hard to get settled in, I think, in a lot of situations. So you're kind of living out of your backpack, not knowing if you're going to get, sent home at any given time. And it's not like a study abroad program or something where you're going to see all the sites. You're there and you're practicing and you're playing your games, and everyone in your city knows you're there to play basketball for the team that means so much to them. So they don't really like seeing you out and enjoying yourself too much either. So watch a lot of The Wire and Lost, but also just had a lot of time to myself, right? And to think about life and all that sort of stuff.
And you grew up a little bit around the NBA, given that your older brother, Matt Bonner, played. I think he's got some great nicknames. My favorite is probably Red Mamba.
Yeah,
and so as you were seeing his experience, is that kind of what you were expecting? Like, hey, I'm going to be the Matt Bonner of Lithuania when I get out there, and what was that?
No, every player, every Division I player thinks they can be the 15th man in a suit that looks good in layup lines on the worst team in the NBA, right? And so, from my perspective, it was, I need to get over here, go over there and I'll work my way up. I'll have some good games against better teams. They will offer me more money and bring me on board. It's not too dissimilar to a startup experience, right? When you set out, the reality of that doesn't always line up, and you're going to have more struggles than you realize and things like that. And, my goal was to, I'm going to level up every single year, and I'm going to make it to the Euro Cup and then the Euro League. And, if you can do that, if you're a top player on a top Euro League team, being the man in Milan or Barcelona is a pretty sweet life.
Yeah.
I think you see a lot of guys who are maybe fringe NBA players choose that over, being a role player on a not so great NBA team. And I don't blame a lot of guys, who do that. But yeah, the goal was to go out there and, I always thought right circumstances, I could be in the NBA. And I ended up in 2011 during the lockout, I was in Lithuania while the European Championships were going on there. So we were playing a lot of EuroLeague teams in the preseason. A lot of NBA players were over there. I did really well. And then, there were guys that got released from some of the worst teams in Lithuania who had finished that season on, NBA rosters because there was a shortage of players that season. And then I was thinking to myself, I'm an idiot. I should have just hung back and stayed in the D League, and I probably would have ended up in a roster. And I was a 7-foot ogre who could foul people hard and shoot some threes. Maybe I could have got a few spot minutes here and there.
Yeah, well, especially 10 years ago, there was, before the sort of 3-point revolution in the NBA, there was probably a bigger market for that too. You talked a little bit about having a lot of time to yourself, and I've heard you say before, right? Like, it's a little different when you're playing internationally. You're not near your friends. It's not like you have a big social life when you're there. You filled that time, obviously, catching up on prestige television. At some point, were you also thinking about what came post-career, the work that you've done with college athletes around labor law? I mean, how did that bridge get there?
Yeah. So I kind of had I have a unique relationship, I would say, with like reforming college athletics, in that I'm 5 years younger than my brother Matt, and 4.5 years younger than my older sister Becky. They both were like all Americans, right? Like my sister's going to Nike camp in 7th grade. My brother, same thing. Like we're at the Y in Concord, New Hampshire, and like Billy Donovan, Mike Krzyzewski, and Tara Vanderveer are sitting in the corner of the gym, watching them. So I was kind of exposed to just like all of the NCAA hypocrisy, while I'm going through middle school, and seeing how hard it still was for my parents financially. My dad's a letter carrier for the USPS. My mom was an elementary school teacher, and like, just like trying to see a game, or like if my brother gets hurt and needs support, like trying to figure out how the heck are we even going to do that when he's down in Florida and all of us are up in New Hampshire. Meanwhile, seeing, him play on CBS on a Saturday afternoon, there's 20,000 people there chanting his name, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I kind of I understood kind of like the dynamic very young. And then I got involved just through, when I transferred, I ended up doing a sport management grad program, and I started taking sport labor law classes through that, while I was also playing Division I college basketball. And then I got super involved kind of in that movement, and stayed engaged with that while I was playing overseas. So, I mean, I spent a lot of my time, binge watching before binge watching was a thing, on DVDs, believe it or not, or pirated stuff. Don't tell anyone. But I also, was kept in contact with, some of the leaders on the labor movement for college athletes throughout that time. And I also got a gig, writing and editing for a website, a creative writing website called Flip Collective, that former NBA player Paul Shirley was running. But yeah, I mean, that's mostly how I spent my time. When I think back on it, I wish I just got like a bunch of SaaS like sales jobs that I could do remotely and suck at it, but like learn. I just like think it would have crushed if you got like a sales email from a random person playing pro basketball in Lithuania. I'm
not even sure SaaS was that big of a thing back then, man. But hindsight is 2020. It is interesting when we talk about the era of NIL that we're in, and I think a lot of people that maybe haven't been around sort of college sports and seen that transition don't realize how long of a fight it's been. I mean, dating back to the Ed O'Bannon case and just trying to get that worked out, and then how that turned into what we're seeing with NIL today, and the enrichment cases that Mark Emmert was presiding over, and it's really a multi-decade long fight that has now turned into college athletes can create NFTs. But I think not enough people know that sort of long arc that it's taken to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I started working really in that space around 2006, 2007, while I was in school. And I remember those days feeling like nobody can know that I'm like questioning any of this, or that I might be ungrateful for my scholarship or something. I remember having meetings with some of my law professors, right? Like behind closed doors, like super secret, just to see like how we've gone from that to where we are today. There's a lot of folks. I think social media helped a lot with that, and like kind of getting voicing some of the issues out and finding comfort in shared experiences through those. But yeah, I mean, it's been a long time, but it's come a long way. And now with NIL, like, to me, that's not reform. Like, that's fine. That's like the most obvious thing. It's like the NCAA said, sure, you can have a side hustle if you tell us what you're making and if we think it's okay. But that's still, it is still progress, and it never would have happened, right, without any of this stuff. And a lot of the gains you've seen athletes have really been a result of class action lawsuits, to be honest, that take years and years and years and millions of dollars to fight for the NCAA. And then they can roll out a campaign about how they're putting the athletes first with a new development that they spent, $50 million fighting against for the past 5 years.
Well, you'll see no objection from me. This is not a necessarily pro NCAA podcast from that standpoint. But I want to chat with you about what you're doing now with Power Forward, because I think it's a very natural transition going from obviously championing sort of the power that athletes have. It's a constant topic with us on this show, because really in the social media era, the economics have changed and the dynamics have changed of how brands engage athletes in endorsement, how athletes choose equity over endorsement. So this is kind of a perfect time for us to talk through Power Forward. So tell us about the company and sort of what the need you saw in the market was.
Yeah, I mean, my background is like directly relevant. Like, that's the weirdest thing, is like I'm sitting at the helm of this business where I think sometimes even myself, I don't realize some of like the actual credentials I have. And I sit here and I'm like, I am actually the exact person to do this, right? Like, I have a very unique background. And I think hearing different investors and stuff reiterate that to me is like reinforce my own confidence in that. But basically, yeah, I mean, the confluence of my background, I transitioned into advertising eventually. I was a 27-year-old intern, right? I had no professional experience after playing basketball at an ad agency. But I ended up, spinning out my own sports marketing shop. And I started running all the like influencer and partnership programs for a number of different like programmatic ad agencies that didn't have that capability, and for a number of different brands. And really, like, I was kind of like talking about this with my co-founder one day as someone should do this thing. And then we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, let's do it. And then we went and filed paperwork to form a business to create Power Forward as the athlete to consumer marketplace. And then I think a day later, the entire world came to a screeching halt because it was March 2020. But yeah, I mean, our core goal, right, is like we're helping athletes monetize their most valuable remnant asset. So that's like your audience, but also your name, image, and likeness. And so off the court, off the field, we see this like inverse correlation between name recognition and compensation. And we're really existing to empower athletes and fans to kind of solve that problem. So to start, we came out of the gate kind of focused on building out these athlete shops as a uniform marketplace. A lot of athlete merch and things like that, but each athlete shop is uniquely yours, but you're also part of the aggregate community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So talking a little bit about that inception idea, right? It seems like, again, it's been in vogue. A lot of agents and managers and athletes themselves are talking about it. But generally speaking, that's for the top 1%, right? It's the LeBrons, the KDs, and folks that can have a really big team around them to create a media brand and create a shoe and apparel deal. Are those the athletes that you want to work with you, or what is the scope and reach of the athletes that you think make sense for Power Forward?
Yeah, I mean, LeBron, baby, if you're listening, I'm always available. I'm happy to work with you on this. No, I mean, I do think we have a purpose and a utility and a place for those level players. But I mean, to start, that's not where we are, right? I mean, it's our focus kind of out of the gate was more, I mean, like 99.9% of like the resources, as you're alluding to, go to the top, 1% athlete on that front. That doesn't mean the rest have zero value. And in fact, there's a huge, I saw like just like a huge market opportunity, especially in women's sports, around, these massive, like underserved and overlooked kind of like categories within sports where there's really passionate fan bases, and also where a lot of those LeBrons and top 1%ers also want to engage as supporters and as fans. And so that was kind of like, I mean, we really focused on the WNBA to start. So, I mean, beyond opportunity, if you look at any of the major like trends in all of the leagues, they generally start like 2 years prior in the WNBA, from taking a knee to whatever. And so that was very intentional. And I mean, I'm a big like women's basketball fan, have been super embedded in that space through my sister, which I'm really lucky about as well. And so, I mean, that was kind of like the logical entry point, and we saw how quickly, we were able to kind of like have success there and expand beyond that.
It's such an underestimated thing for a lot of casual sports fans, where they don't realize what avidity women's sports have. And so, and I'll just tell you anecdotally, we've had Megan Klingenberg on, and she started her own brand, Re-Ink, with some of the other women that won the national championship. The World Cup championship, excuse me. And then we had Tina Charles on, and we've had Haley Rosen, who started Just Women's Sports. The listenership for us on those blows anything that I would have expected, because again, I think based on some of the names and based on the name recognition and the Twitter followings and all this kind of stuff. And then when you go and you listen, and the avidity and the engagement and the questions that people are reaching out with, it's really still surprising to me how underestimated that is. And so I love that you have picked at least that as one of the, again, I don't want to use the word niche, but like verticals that you're going after.
Yeah. I mean, I should also take a moment to apologize in advance to you and any sponsors you have for the impending metrics you get on on this episode for having me as a guest.
Not at all a concern for us and our listeners. Because look, I think for me, when we started this show, being honest here, it's a spectrum from JJ Redick, who was a great guest and talked about what he's doing, but he also has other avenues to share those stories. So what's interesting for me is sharing one end of the spectrum and then the other. So don't feel like, believe me, I can tell you some horror stories about some of the listenership and metrics that we've had on episodes that we thought would crush. You're gonna be just fine. Coming back to Power Forward a little bit, I'm curious why the marketplace idea, because you've built an agency before, you've had that experience. There are agency models and merch service agencies that exist for influencers out there. Why a technology startup?
Well, I mean, this is like much bigger than merchandise, to be frank. It's really this notion of ownership is like the essential here. This is a little bit where some of my labor background leaks into it, I guess. But one of the like really fascinating phenomenons within sports is that your athlete body is your labor unit, but it's also the product, right? That's like a super unique kind of like phenomenon in sports. Similarly, when you think of fans are your consumers, but they're also a product that teams and leagues monetize and sell ads against and things like that. So ultimately, like what we're working towards is really like building a platform that's going to kind of be able to shift. So those two key stakeholders have more of like an ownership capacity within the industry. So yeah, we have to start somewhere. Merch was the entry point for sure. But we definitely have like a very focused, like roadmap we're on, but definitely like larger aspirations as we continue to build our community, over the, ensuing however long.
Yeah. And so the last bit about the team, cause you'll get a sense for the flow of things that I want, usually for me, when I'm looking at a new startup, team is the number one thing. What did you think about, and what did you feel like was essential for you to have on your team as you guys started building the company?
Athletes is part of it. Athletes. So our team's made up of athletes, direct-to-consumer experts, and then we have like some Web3 and NFT enthusiasts, like natives, right, on that front. But yeah, I mean, those are kind of like the key things, not just athletes though, but like, I mean, we've got people that, one of our team members she was an Olympic triple jumper in Tokyo, and also has extensive experience running community for really big, tech companies. And so like building out kind of like a team that is representative of our like key user base was a big part of it.
Yeah. So moving on from team a little bit, which I think it's great to hear, right? You've got a sense of the athlete relationships, you've got a sense of D2C, and then obviously an eye towards what's happening with Web3 and NFTs. Let's talk about market size a little bit. It's sort of the the biggest challenge that a lot of startups that are building in sports and in and around athletes always hear, okay, you know, how big is this market really? What are some of the different angles and opportunities that you were alluding to in this athlete to consumer market, and which ones are you going after sort of in the near term?
Yeah, so we are kind of going more upstream at the moment. And so a lot of focus on digital products and NFTs developed with athletes and tying those to physical goods and experiences, and doing more top shelf production on that stuff as well. But we really kind of exist at this this space that is like at the center, right, of like creator economy, digital goods, and NFTs, and like sportswear. Those are all really big markets. But yeah, that's kind of that's more so the realm that we're playing in from a market standpoint.
Yeah, and as you think about how these athletes collaborate in this aspect, right? Like, is there a model for it? You know, I know you're doing some work with Sonny Michel. Maybe we can use that as an example. Is that a model for what an athlete NFT collaboration looks like? And what are customers, or what are people in the community getting access to? They get to have a FaceTime with him. Like, what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to vary based on the drop. So I'm next. I shouldn't say a time, right? Because this is being recorded. Yeah, so like we're doing a drop that's actually a collaboration between Terrence Mann on the LA Clippers and Kelsey Trainer, who is one of my favorite followers on Twitter, or favorite people to follow on Twitter. We did a project with her, even though she's not an athlete, but just around her messaging and leveraging our athlete user base to help amplify that has become like a huge thing. And honestly, in like every sports league around invest in women, pay women, hire women.
Yep.
And so, yeah, they're actually putting out a limited edition radio that's going to be made by Tivoli Audio, which is like a high-end audio company based on Newbury Street in Boston. And that there's going to be like different tiers of that, right? So there's the top tier, you're going to get like a one-of-one handmade, hand-sewn hoodie tied to that with like the highest edition of the NFT. And then you go down and you're getting the hoodie and the radio. And then bottom tier is, just the hoodie. And we're able to kind of like mess around with like what comes with those, and that's going to influence pricing. But I'm trying to guilt Terrence Mann into basically flying out whoever buys the one-of-one to go to the an LA Sparks Atlanta Dream game next summer, because Terrence's mom is an assistant coach on the Dream, for example. But yeah, it's like a mix of things. So top tier, you might get some autograph memorabilia. You get access into our Discord community, like we host athlete creative sessions and things like that in there that I think are really fascinating to see. And then as you go down, it's like we'll do lotteries for tickets and things like that, access to events, and then so on and so forth.
Yeah, with any consumer brand, one of the things as an investor I love to just have a understanding of is like the ideal customer profile. Like who is the customer in your mind that is going to be checking in on Power Forward drops, once a week or on a regular cadence to make sure that they're not missing out on the new thing that you're coming out with?
So we're seeing a mix now on that front. There's definitely an emerging interest from like Web3 native types, for sure. And then we have like our foundational followers. I think our largest like presence and level of recognition is in like the women's sports space. But there's actually like a lot of athletes that are like the consumers themselves too. So, I mean, we see it as, still that underserved, fan base who wants to align with really all the athletes we're investing in, right? Yep. We're investing alongside them to kind of like reinforce that messaging that those subsets are thriving, right? Communities.
Yeah. How do you think about saturation in this space? I'm just new myself to this sort of Web3 world and looking at, Bored Apes or CryptoPunks or Lazy Lions or any of these different examples, is there a point at which somebody's going to say, okay, I think I own enough NFTs, like I'm good? Or do you feel like we're still in sort of early innings in terms of that digital ownership conversation?
I think we're still very early on there. And I think I mean, not the ones you mentioned, but there's a lot that are like kind of like short term and really no end goal in sight. We are very much like, we've been around, being around for even almost 2 years now is like an eternity for a lot of those types of things. But also we're building towards a larger goal. So like, as an athlete coming on, being part of a drop is like your entry point into also, being part of a bigger, a bigger initiative as a member of the community at that point with us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's other projects are going to, do what they're going to do as well. I think we have a very unique kind of user base, and we kind of have this confluence of Web3, but also I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be looking at this as like there's immediate utility tied to the purchase. And this is actually like from our perspective, like a really good way to do like pre-order type stuff where there's more to it and you're more invested as the consumer and you're along for the journey for kind of everything else that's to come down the road. And we're able to make like way higher end stuff in this manner.
And I guess as I think about, other leagues, other entities that are starting to build their own forays into the NFT world. I'm using that specifically because I know it's not just merch, it's sort of a broader thing. Yep. But, NBA Top Shot, I think NFL is signing a similar deal with Dapper Labs. MLB has, tried to create their own thing. Is that in conflict with what you're trying to do, or are they somebody that you consider to be a competitor?
No, not at all. I think so. I mean, part of it honestly is like, I think of, I don't know how to say this. Like there are people who own probably like $1 million in like, NBA Top Shot moments and sit courtside and you have no idea, like, right. That's where they exist. We kind of bridge that digital physical world now. So you can kind of like express that in the event, but also, Top Shot and a lot of those, other NFT projects you're referencing, they don't like the specific players don't really benefit financially, right? Like they don't see the upside in any of those moments, kind of like being sold on the secondary market. Whereas I think there's power to really having this athlete first, avenue within that world.
I'm glad you said that. I think that's the thing that's the most compelling sort of piece of anything like this to me, which is, the leagues obviously have their own deals, and even taking away from NFTs for a second, looking at, the NFL has a Gatorade deal, but there are NFL athletes that have different beverages and sports drinks that they support, that they have, appearance for equity contracts with. And insofar as they're not within the sort of, 100 yards, they're able to promote that. They're able to have it on the sideline. And then when the game starts, okay, now you're in uniform. Now you're doing the thing. When do you think that shift happened? Was there a specific time where athlete generation, Z said, I'm done with endorsement checks, pay me in equity?
There was so much, right? Like I grew up in the in the 90s, early 2000s. You always heard about like the broke athlete, right? Like on the other side of their career. I don't know what it is, right? Like it used to be like athletes wanted to be musicians and athletes wanted to be comedians. Now every athlete is an enterprise, right? And wants to be an entrepreneur. There's just more awareness. I think the NBA has done a really good job around this, with even just like investing heavily in player development, which is really professional development, in pushing more like awareness around, players understand their own mortality, right? And how finite a playing career is. And if you can, leverage that for stuff that maybe will pay out bigger down the road when you're maybe not going to like rather than just like getting a cash grab immediately when you maybe don't need it. I think that we've just seen that's a really good move for a lot of athletes. Now, I would say there's risk associated with that too, right? And a lot of athletes like want to see that a early stage business can get to a certain point before kind of sticking their own neck out for that business and risk their own like whatever personal brand perception. And then also just like understanding, I mean, I've always been of the opinion, like you shouldn't even take an endorsement for a company or a business unless you'd be willing to be on their cap table.
Right.
And so like understanding, the values and everything that goes along with a company beyond just like, what's the dollar amount, I think is like really important, especially today.
It's a great thought. And I think the one sort of piece that I would add on to that is that media rights have just grown in such immense value that it used to just be the tier one guys that said, I have enough money to invest and maybe I don't need to, get an endorsement check to supplement my income. And now it seems like tier two, tier three, basically just before practice squad, you're still making enough from your NHL, MLB, NBA, NFL salary to have a couple of irons in the fire, which again, 10 years ago, not really available. And so when guys were worried about what they're going to do post-career, they hadn't tested out the waters, which now because they're getting that salary, they're able to do a little bit more. I want to chat with you last bit about sort of the market landscape. With something like this, and especially consumer products, a moat is a very interesting thing, and it's hard to know, right? Because consumer mindset is fickle. People sort of swing from one interesting thing to the other. What do you think about as the moat that you want to build with Power Forward?
Yeah, I mean it's the community, right? Like I think the way things are going, like we have an advantage inherently by starting when we started and how just our entire business is structured, in that moving forward, your brand is your users, right? Like that's where it comes from. So I think our moat is just like the level of trust we have within the industry, our understanding of the nuance within sports, and just like that community, the quality of our products, the responsiveness of all the other pieces that go with like entrepreneurship as an athlete. Like you don't have to worry about, we've got the best customer service, like all that sort of stuff kind of like lined up, which we can do at scale in aggregate, right? Which is really hard to do in a silo on a one-by-one basis. But ultimately it's that like authentic community that we're building, right? That stands for something, but also is really about it. Because consumers today, I think, can see through that when it's like marketing speak. And I think we're positioned in a really nice way from a long-term perspective. And we also constantly have new waves of athletes coming into the fold. So I think there's a major opportunity there to be adaptive and stay relevant for many years to come.
Yeah, this is probably a good segue for us to talk a little bit more about product, but we'll sort of do it through the lens of community. What is the community exactly? Are they engaging with each other? Because look, I've been in some Discord channels where the entire community is just like, hey, when's this thing gonna pop? Like when's the floor price gonna move to 10x what it is now? Like, okay, well that's not really a community. That's everybody sort of being bag holders together. Like, what do you think about when you think of an effective operating community?
Yeah, so ours is closed right now. To be honest, it's not even public yet.
Yeah.
Our always from the start, like our ethos is like this has to be like for the athletes first, right? I strongly believe if you look at it from a strictly like marketplace side, right? That's like we are catering to our supply side. Supply will bring the demand side along with it. So when I think about the community piece, honestly, like athletes really like each other and like knowing each other, and like learning about this sort of stuff. So we've kind of like we've created this, we're creating a space right now where it's very much like internal at the moment. to get it kind of going, because we want to make sure we're setting the tone so that it isn't what you're talking about, right? Where it's just like a million bots and just constantly complaining about the floor price of something and having a mutiny on your hand. We're trying to build this in a long-term sustainable manner where, being part of that community, the represents something more than whatever a floor price can ever be, right?
Yep.
To take a page out of the Doodles book, right, where they just ignore any talk about a floor price.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that from our perspective, it starts with the athletes, but also being smart and intentional about how we're rolling out, these NFTs and NFT times physical products with athletes that are aligned with the type of values that we want to attract ultimately.
Yeah. We were chatting about SaaS earlier, and the reason SaaS is such a VC darling is because it's a very sort of scalable, repeatable, profitable process, right? When I think about something like this, I'm curious how much of this can be SaaSified and sort of can be repeatable versus has to be bespoke by the virtue of you're working with influential, sometimes ego-driven stars. And how do you think about that balance of bespoke versus repeatable?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of funny. One thing we've seen is that we've had a lot of athletes wanting to then, like, once they're on, they want to collaborate with each other. So we're doing a lot of like teach them to fish sort of stuff right now. Like early on, you do unscalable stuff to get to a point where you can scale it. So we're seeing that like kind of come into fruition. And we're able to roll out kind of like campaigns through all of the athletes too, where it's customizable through, trust in our aesthetic and garment selection and stuff like that, where we can kind of present options and stuff is still uniquely yours. But there's power to be, we've learned is like, there's power to the connectivity as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a different approach that you need to do to recruit an athlete partner like Sue Bird versus, maybe the sort of rising, D1 star? And what are some of the techniques that you found that succeed in terms of convincing folks to work?
I'm not going to tell you that.
I mean, it could be something that's specific.
I'll tell you the secret potion for getting Sue Bird involved is to have Becky Bonner as your older sister. Doesn't hurt.
That's a moat, Luke. Hey, when we talk about moat, that's a moat. So
I mean, I grew up watching. My sister played for the Philadelphia Bells AU team, and Sue was on the Liberty Bells. And I mean, I was probably playing GI Joes on the wrestling mats in the corner, and Gino's REM's lap while Nicole Kazmarski and Sue Bird are going head to head at the Junior Nationals in Washington D.C. So like those are like deep rooted ties that I think were part of it, but. I mean, a lot of it is like initially, right, is that level of trust. Like we weren't just like NIL, new business opportunity, right? Like that's not us. Like we started with pro athletes too. I didn't think NIL was going to be a thing until 2023 even, like at the time. And so I think there are differences though, for sure. Like the college athlete is probably going to want to DM you or text you. like honestly, like it goes down in the DMs. Like that's where a lot of that kind of stuff happens. Some of those athletes might not have like sophisticated representatives either. And so some of the college athletes, we really go through a lot of, the detail and stuff like that. And you have to, I'll talk to compliance departments at schools. I want to make sure they fully understand, what's going on, because it's not like an endorsement, right? This is like they're building their own thing, and we are the avenue to do that. And so obviously there's different levels of like sophistication from like a representative standpoint between the different levels. And so, I mean, that's been an interesting thing to experience.
No, I'm glad that's the direction you took it in, because that's kind of what I was thinking, right? There's a lot of brands out there today, and again, speaking more generally, but like even direct to consumer brands that feel like getting a top tier athlete, getting a top tier influencer on board as a co-creative director is going to juice sales. And realistically, what we find is like even the Kardashians have like 0.0001% conversion. Now, that's a conversion rate based on a very, very large following, but it's hard. I think people have bigger expectations of their stars than really do convert.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think is like hard for a lot of the college athletes to understand too, right? Like follower does not equal fan. Fact, right? Especially as an athlete. What we work on a lot, if we are involved, if we don't get super hands-on with everyone, but we do when we can, right? To like help facilitate adoption, stuff like that. And we share what we know and stuff. We're very big on kind of encouraging athletes to take more of an ICU approach to a product rather than like, look at me kind of situation. And so there's like that opportunity then to build longer term, right? And so as an athlete, you have a platform, and if you can leverage that platform in a way that's yours, but that attaches to a bigger movement, that's going to probably be more successful than slapping a logo on a shirt and expecting people to understand what that logo represents or means.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I love the clarity with which you described it. So sort of going into our final few questions here, because I know our time is brief. From athlete to now startup founder, what has surprised you the most about building Power Forward?
It's really emotional. No, there's a lot of ups and downs. We've done a great job, right? There's, I think of like just like the notion of, right, like you're either feeling euphoria or terror, right? And that's a very unhealthy, way to live, and it's hard to stomach for a lot of people. I mean, that goes into like, I think my background as an athlete, though, I try to come back to that in like, just like the Spurs mantra of the Stonecutters Credo, which please don't make me recite that, but definitely Google the Stonecutters Credo. But basically like teams that win championships, things like that, right? Like you're going to have low points, high points, and you just need to find a way to stay like even keel. You're never as bad as you thought you were, and you're never as good as you think you are. And just kind of like being able to deal with that. And also just like understand that survival is success in certain times too. And so, I mean, that's been the most surprising part is like I can't believe how like emotional how heavy it can. I mean, it makes sense, but like a lot of people think like, oh, that's sick. Like you're your own boss, right? Like you're in charge. It's like, yeah, I am in charge, and my entire company's, remote. Like I haven't met over half of them in person before. And sometimes you have to make really hard decisions as the person in charge. And doing that is not always easy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the honesty there. I'm assuming fundraising was a new experience for you as well, right? So you guys went through Techstars. It was my
first time fundraising.
So
going into it, I was like terrified of that and thought it was gonna be the worst thing ever. I love it. I love it. No. I shouldn't say it so enthusiastically because I'll never get out of it. But no, it's something I don't actually mind. Like, I love having these conversations. I love meeting different people. And while I haven't been able to like travel or go see people in person, I almost wonder if that's helpful in the sense, that I'm like able to have so many pitches like so quickly, especially doing something like Techstars.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, from my perspective, I get competitive in those a little bit. I mean, I get a little bit of like ego, I guess, at times, but I think you kind of need that in those positions. And it's great. Like, I love just like talking about this thing that means the world to me, to different people. And if someone doesn't agree with me that it's going to be the next big thing, then I cannot wait to like prove them wrong, basically.
I love that energy, and it's so funny how many athletes I hear that from. I think there's something unique about that. Like, I have my doubters, and I'm going to prove them wrong energy that just translates so well off the court onto what you're doing.
It also translates to good practices from a fundraising perspective, because I'm going to add you to my calendar 6 months out and just email you to let you know that we're still here. Right.
Yeah.
Like, even if you said like, no, it's a no from us or whatever.
Right. No, hey, look, it's fair. And I tell a lot of entrepreneurs, especially ones that are listening, sometimes the best thing is a quick no, because it just allows you to move on to the next thing, right? You're going to have an average of 350 conversations anyway. The faster you know to move on to the next one, sometimes just the mental clarity it brings is even better than anything else. For sure.
Definitely get to know as fast as you can, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, where we'll close, Luke, and you've been so generous with your time. Clearly, this is something you are so passionate about. I'm excited to see how it grows over the coming years. What is one piece of advice looking back that you would like to give your younger self?
Okay, very specific to me and to any athlete that might be listening and overseas right now, is you have way more time than you think you do. And I mean, going back to what I said earlier, get a job or go through the process of trying to get a job. Like while you're doing that, instead of just watching, stuff on Netflix or hanging out or whatever. Cause like, it won't be all your only source of income while you're playing. But you're going to learn what jobs exist, what's out there, or get a job or start something, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason to wait on that. You can do both at the same time. So that would be like, I think, my biggest thing. I think you get very stuck in like, I'm a basketball player, and if I'm not focused on that or thinking about that, then I'm somehow like negatively impacting like how I will perform. That's just not true. So do more than that. while you're getting a check from playing a game.
Well, that's a great place for us to leave it, Luke. Especially, I think that's relevant not just for international players, but guys that are maybe mid-career trying to figure out what they want to do. You do have more time than you think you do, and there's a lot of interesting ways, especially today, that you could take that. So I think with that, we'll close our episode of The Game Plan today. Luke, thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate it.